Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Asaf Ramarowski, and I am your host at the SPME webinar series. Once again, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to our show. This afternoon, we have the pleasure and honor of hosting our good friend Harel Chorev. Harel is a prolific researcher and writer from the Dayan Center at the University of Tel Aviv. He's an expert on Palestinian networks, and everything that Harel writes is worthy of reading and listening to, as he's a great erudite observer of the current conflict historically and currently. Um, this afternoon, he will be discussing Gaza, the next steps. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about as far as where we are a month post the ceasefire. There are still three bodies of hostages that need to be brought back, but 20 of the live hostages have been indeed released, and 25 out of the 28 of the deceased are also back home, thankfully. But there's much to be discussed. Hamas is far from disarming, and there are many questions going forward as far as what Gaza in this next step actually looks like. And Harel has a lot to say about that, and we'll dive into that as we go forward. Housekeeping wise, Harel will talk for about 15 minutes or so. Then we'll go into Q&A as always. Feel free to type in all your questions. There will be, I'm sure, a lot to ask in the chat. If we don't get to your questions, I apologize in advance, but we will do our best to respond after the webinar, and then we'll take it from there. So really, without further ado, Harel, welcome, and the virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Asaf. Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I will try to be as brief as I can in order to leave you enough place for questions. I know that usually that takes more than we plan, and that's fine with me. So I'll try basically just to draw the skeleton of things as I see them until now and from now. Throughout the war, I think we had two main approaches regarding what is going on. One was supporting, I would say, stopping the war in all sorts of points that seemed back then as fit to one, get the hostages back, and maybe even to check Hezbollah and to check the Houthis. I'm talking, of course, before our attack on Hezbollah last year. Before of that, people said, let's postpone it. That's okay. We will be able to take care of it in 2-3 years. But we know that things are much harder than what people usually anticipate. One of the most popular saying back then was Hamas will always provide us with the reason to go back to the war. So let's first release the hostages and then we will take care of Hamas. As these days shows, and trust me, people will re-forget it again. And if God forbid we will tackle the same situation, I'm pretty sure we will hear the same arguments. But as we see today, it's not easy to go back to the war. Hamas is providing us, surprisingly, I must say, even as a specialist for Hamas, I didn't believe that it would be to such an extent, providing us enough opportunities, to attack back and to finish the job with Hamas, because Hamas cannot stay. Hamas cannot stay. And whatever people were saying that, yes, of course, he refuses to disarm and so on and so forth, anyone that think that Hamas can stay basically returns us to this October 6th way of thinking. But we see how hard it is to go back. Now, I was one of those who supported the continuation of the war, despite of all the prices, and I think they were heavy, of course, and it was not an easy thing, especially as someone who volunteered regularly on the headquarters of the hostages family. So I was, sort of divided between my professional capacity as someone who was on a daily basis in the media, and both the Israeli and the international, and as someone who volunteered for the hostages' family. The balance between national broad interests and the national interest, because it was also definitely a national interest of returning the hostages, was a conflictuated one. Nevertheless, I believe that pushing this war forward indeed cost us pushing those two goals together cost us in basically in time. It's not that they were conflictuating in, face to face or head to head. It was more of, of delaying each other in a way that basically postponed the war and delayed, because obviously we couldn't act in Gaza with free hands, because we had hostages spread it all over the place. So even from the operational point of view, it was impossible to work fast and hard. And on the other hand, if we would work hard and fast, it would of course cost us with our hostages and probably many innocent Palestinian lives as well. So it took time, which was anticipated. The first, I write a war diary, and I am already in the fifth book or booklet of it. And not long ago, I checked what I wrote on the first day, and it was that this war, that we need to prepare the public and the international community for that it won't be Yom Kippur war. It will definitely won't be 6 days war. It would be a long war, because we're fighting against jihadists, which are stubborn, which the elements of being patient and steadfastness are the two key elements that affect their way of fighting and surviving. And this will take us a lot of time. Let me take you to a very current example to exemplify what I just said. As you may have heard, there are several dozens of terrorists, Hamas terrorists, locked up in the tunnels in Rafah. They were offered already to surrender, but their answer was no. We will leave those tunnels by the terms that we will determine. We will not give up our weapons, for example, to the Israeli army, and we will not surrender to the Israeli army, but rather do something else, whether it is, to go in exile or whatever, and to give the weapons to. So this is the way of really you can take this way of thinking and brought it on to the Hamas thinking generally. They were losing the whole war, and still they acted in negotiation, in everything, as if they are the winners and not the losers. So it's very hard to conclude a war like that. It's very hard, and this is exactly why it took so long. Not that we didn't do mistakes along the way. For example, we needed to, for example, we could and should have entered Rafah long before it was actually done. Um, in any way, the current events are that Israel indeed suffered the greatest loss ever since the Holocaust, and a major surprise, even more than the Yom Kippur War. Not in terms of fatalities and casualties, but in terms of surprise, of in the fact that most of them were civilians, with all the atrocities that came with it, and the rape and burning families and all those horrible things. In that sense, it was the most horrible defeat and event since the Holocaust. And nobody doubted. But I must say, at the beginning, it was interesting enough. At the beginning, you could see that people cannot really internalize that it is such a disaster. And I remember that when I said it on TV, for example, people said, people that were sitting next to me were saying, "Oh no, don't exaggerate the Holocaust," and stuff like that. Later on, especially when President Biden said that, it becomes a common wisdom. Um, and it, obviously, I don't want to say anything about my way of the way I saw it, but rather on the fact that we were all shocked, that we were all shocked. This is the issue, and because of that, I think people were not, despite of so many times that this thing of emphasizing that it will take a lot of time, people didn't really internalize it and still don't. When you're bringing to the table the question of ammunition, for example, very few people know that since January, February 2024, the IDF lacked a lot of ammunition, mainly because the United States didn't send everything, okay? Just until January, we received something like 264 shipments. In the next 6 months, namely from January to May, June, we received half of it in half a year. So people don't know these constraints, and obviously it affects their whole analysis. As for the future, uh, I think we're standing in a point that most of the analysts, both Israelis and Americans, the Americans that I meet here, just in a tour 3 weeks ago in Washington, to all the major think tanks, Washington Institute, RAND, the Atlantic Council, FDD, all of them were pretty united around the expectation or on the around the analysis that Israel will probably have to go back to finish the job with Hamas. Because regardless what the administration say, and obviously projecting a lot of optimism as the Americans very often do, the things on ground are much harder to square. And therefore, the Hamas doesn't show any signs of, willing to disarm, doing anything to get stronger, paying $25 a day for new recruits, which is it's a considerable amount in terms of the Gaza Strip, rebuilding tunnels, anything that you can think of in terms of strengthening. And obviously, showing in so many ways they are not willing to withdraw from the government. And now, again, it brings me a reminder to many naives in Israel. I'm not talking around the world. Many of them belong to the security establishment who said the Egyptian initiative, which basically argued that Hamas can withdraw from a government but without surrendering their weapons, is doable. Okay, so they said the Egyptian initiative is the best one, the most realistic one, and we said all the time, not just me, many others said Hamas that is armed is a ruling Hamas. So this is the point where we are standing at the moment. And as my colleagues in Washington, I do as well believe that Israel will have to engage in some sort of a pinpointed operation in Gaza City, not necessarily a wide one throughout the Gaza Strip, but rather something that will be pointed to the governing center of Hamas in the Gaza City. And because otherwise, again, it's 6 October all over again. And in this regard, I think no one in Israel is any more willing to accept such a reality. Just last word before I get to your question regarding the tunnels. The reason I'm talking about the tunnels is that it is, at the end of the day, something that differentiates between the Gaza Strip and or the Gazan front and let's say Lebanon or any other front that Israel is dealing with. Yes, there were and probably are several tunnels in Lebanon, but it's not the same situation like in Gaza in so many respects. And in that sense, Hamas has a strong strategic weapon against Israel, both to attack and to defend itself if Israel is not destroying it. And this is why Trump's point about destroying the tunnels is so crucial. Nevertheless, and this is an insight that I actually understood just lately, those tunnels in the right methodology and approach and work by the army can also become a death trap. And this is what we see in Rafah today. They are besieged there. They are besieged both underground and disconnected from the rest of the network, of the tunnel network, and besieged from above the ground. Namely, the army movement towards this area of tunnel was above the ground and under the ground, which is a method that the IDF is using for quite a while, taught the American general that came to see it in their own eyes, were extremely impressed. I can tell you this from a first hand. And Israel is basically teaching a lot of new methodologies in this multi-dimensional war that is taking place in the Gaza Strip in the past 2 years, multi-dimensional war, namely tunnels above the ground, and of course drone. All of these things are considered as multi-dimensional warfare and I guess any modern army might meet them or address them sooner or later, especially drone warfare. So this is the situation at the moment. We are in a certain pose, but as you see from what happened yesterday when Israel killed the new Hezbollah chief of staff, things are still in motion. But it seems that at least one thing important happened, and this is that Israel is not willing to go back to contain provocations and re-strengthening of its enemies, who are jihadist enemies. We need to remember that, and for them, it's a raison d'être. It's a reason for existence. Yeah, I think I'll stop here, Asaf.
Good. Well, thank you for that, Harel. There's obviously many questions that I have, and Alex has, I'm sure, and the audience as well. So let me start us off. I mean, obviously, you gave us a very good kind of lay of the ground of where we are right now. But let me go back to the earlier point that you mentioned, and if you go a little bit into that, and I know you've done a lot of work and research on this, we're talking about mukawama organizations, I mean, resistance groups, and the idea of what defeat actually looks like, conceptually wise. I mean, I know this is part of the lost in translation and part of the debates that have been happening between the US and Israel for sure, as far as how does all this play out? The objective of the war to begin with, from the Israeli perspective, was the entire removal of Hamas. They know they're not going back to 10-6. You know, the policy up until that, clearly came back to bite us. Now we're in this kind of limbo situation, as you clearly articulated, where you have Hamas refusing to disarm. They're talking about we want to have amnesty, we want to have potential extraditions legally wise, and back to obviously countries that are patrons of Hamas, namely Turkey and Qatar. And so, how does this all play into reestablishing deterrence back in the region and allowing, which is obviously a main critical policy and not only a defense policy as well as a political initiative in Israel. How do you convince Israeli citizens to go back to their homes in the south and in the north, respectfully, when they don't feel this, safety going on, and we've not defeated Hamas? So why don't you talk a little bit, if you could talk a little bit about, what does all of that mean, in contrast to, allowing Hamas to lay low and, basically thrive until, the next round.
This is exactly the danger of leaving Hamas as it is. And this is exactly why the notion of total defeat is basically the right notion. But we need to understand what is a total defeat, because everyone, imagine it in the way that it wants. And obviously, when Netanyahu, Israel used it as a sort of a formal term, they didn't really bother to explain what it is. But I must say, I devoted a lot of thought to it throughout the war, and it's not that complicated to explain it. First of all, total defeat is something that we need. Okay, that a total defeat is a condition. It's a precondition for establishing something else. This is what we learned from the American and British experience in Japan, in Germany. And maybe it's the point to say that three colleagues of mine and myself we wrote this day after report, 90-pager report that was used by both the American and Israeli teams, including Jared Kushner's and Ron Dermer's. It's a document that they had for and still having for a very long time, and we recognize key elements of the report in Trump's 20 points, like demilitarization, de-radicalization, and so on. However, what is total defeat in on the ground? It's a precondition for two things. One, to make sure that Hamas won't be able to return and to do another October 7. The second is that its removal, it's a precondition, as I just said, for establishing a different regime there. How do you achieve that? You achieve it by destroying a critical mass of the organization. I think we were pretty close to it, and we're still not that far away from it. Just to give our audience an idea, Hamas before the war was an army, a terror army of 40,000 operatives around. And now we're talking about something like probably 10,000, maybe a little bit less, but around, okay? And in that sense, our mission is to destroy this terror army, okay? We can't say it on every AK-47 holder, because we won't be able to do that. Okay, let's put things in proportion. Even in Israel, we have thousands of illegal weapons held by our population. Okay, so that we won't be able to reach to any Kalashnikov and or to kill the operatives that holds it. But in terms of defeating a critical mass of Hamas army, killing its skeleton, which we did, but still some important commanders are still on their place. This is something which is doable, and this should be the goal of from the beginning. I mean, this was really the goal. And by that, to make sure that Hamas won't be able to do, as I said, both to attack our cities and kibbutzes, and secondly, by allowing others to come instead of it. This is basically how I would define this whole concept of defeat.
Great. Thanks. Alex?
Sure. Well, thanks very much for a terrific overview of a terrible, terrible situation. Um, and there's a lot of, you talked about a lot of things that aren't really as well understood, I think, by among Western audiences. First and foremost, maybe the the uh, the reality of a U.S. arms embargo in the first half, more or less, of 2024, which has had real strategic implications for the unfolding of the campaign, but also a larger term redirection of Israeli policy that we've seen in the last 2, 3 months, declarations about the intention for future strategic independence when it comes to weapons manufacturing. And as the US and Israel go into renegotiating the next memorandum of understanding, this is a huge, huge change that uh, may hopefully come about. So my question really has to do with U.S.-Israel relations, the dimensions here, which obviously shifted dramatically, unbelievably between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. But the Trump administration now owns the situation. There is a U.S. UN sort of mandate for Gaza, and Gaza has been partitioned unofficially into East and West. And we had conversations 2 weeks ago in Washington with some U.S. military officials who are tasked with developing the U.S. Military footprint on the ground. And they're a little bit puzzled about how that's going to look. Um, what's the shape of U.S. military involvement that you're anticipating, and uh, and how is that and any still imaginary international involvement likely to play out in the next few months, on which everything seems to hinge?
Yeah. Well, you put it right, Alex. It's an imaginary international force that will not come to the Gaza Strip. I don't see it happening. And any potential partner of such a force at the moment is reflecting basically the same thing, mainly obviously the UAE and Saudi Arabia and others. Everybody understands that if Hamas remains, and that goes back to what I just said regarding the total defeat condition as we learned it from Japan and Germany. So I don't see it happening, both in terms of the Americans' military involvement. I don't see it happening on a large scale, in a way that America would enforce any policy that it wants to promote. Nevertheless, it's a good occasion to say something that I heard from American UN ambassador Mike Waltz just a week ago, which was very interesting. He said, we don't want Hamas in the Gaza Strip. However, we don't want the Israelis to go in the Gaza Strip because it will thwart our number one strategy, which is to expand the Abraham Accord. Okay, so he really exposed what is the American strategy at the moment, which is, I would say, it's simply overlooking the problems in the Gaza Strip, because you cannot really square this circle of Hamas staying in its place armed and so on, and just jump over it as if it's and to ignore all the that comes with it. And this is why, and Israel is not overlooking it. Israel is definitely in the place of, we will wait, we will let the Americans do their thing, we will let them to come to a conclusion that it's going to fail. As simple as that. This is Netanyahu's strategy at the moment. I think it's pretty clear. You can see that he's not really he's trying to avoid any friction with President Trump, understandably, and I think it's the wise way to do to go. And but because he understands that eventually, even the Americans, I mean the administrations, because as I said, the think tanks, for example, around it, any specialist understand that, including Palestinians, by the way. Read, for example, Ahmed El Khaledi, a very well-informed Gazan sitting in Atlantic Council, writing and speaking about it. He has no, illusions that it simply can't work without a new Israeli intervention in what is going on. So, but at least we understand what is the American policy and what they're trying to achieve. But I think it won't just happen in a huge limp above this huge barricade called Hamas. Uh, that's it, basically. Yeah, that's it, basically.
So it's a wait and see strategy, a kind of containment
Precisely.
strategy,
Precisely.
related
People need
to
to.
expanding
So
the Abraham Accords, but also the U.S. overall shift to try and get out of the Middle East as much as possible and reorient towards China as an
I think, Alex,
overarching strategic
I
concern.
yeah, I think, Alex, the Trump administration see the expansion of the Abraham Accord in in within its global strategy, the war against the economic war against China and the rivalry there. I think, and obviously the whole line that they're trying to build, namely the U.S. and its allies between India and the West through the Middle East and so on. So I think they see it as an empire, see, a world power sees things. However, in on the ground there are certain obstacles that just can be crossed like that. And Israel understand it. Israel, we see that Israel is not, the Hamas, we should say, is provocating the yellow line, so-called, namely the line that divides Gaza into 50% more or less, between the Israeli side, which we can call it the yellow part, and the Gazan side, which is generally being called the black side. And Hamas is provocating the yellow line on a daily basis. They are shooting anti-tanks missiles on heavy equipment, and they even succeeded to kill three soldiers in two different occasions. And Israel is basically showing restraints, but every now and then, when they are taking it too far, like those 16 Hamas operatives who went out from the tunnel trying to get water and food, they also shot at our forces and then were killed by us. So it's not that Israel is totally restrained by the US or a vassal country, as some exaggerately put it, but Israel is trying to work with President Trump. Definitely, it's part of the part of the thing.
So take it one step further, Harel. I mean, Alex, I'm going to jump in here if that's okay.
Yeah,
Alex,
yeah,
yeah,
sure,
okay.
of course.
So take it one step further there. I mean, so obviously you're describing the exact correct tension between, what the goals of the U.S. administration are, and Israel is stuck in this limbo situation. The modality of what Israel has, if you go back to a pre 2005 kind of reality is obviously, Kogat, the civil administration and whatnot, as far as the governance of Gaza. In a limbo situation, are you hearing, or, is there an understanding that if nothing comes to fruition, as far as international forces and as far as American involvement, that Israel is going to go back to an environment like that or some kind of quasi civil administration in order to ensure the fact that on the one hand there would be safety and security, but on the other hand, allow for some kind of economic growth or some kind, I mean, there's a larger question obviously about Palestinian leadership. Who's actually going to govern Gaza once you get rid of Hamas, if you're able to do that? Is that an acceptable model, which within the Israeli zeitgeist today, that is on the table?
Well, it's really connected, Asaf, to the time frame. One of the conclusions from our report was that the historical cases shows that we have a very short, we call it slot, like in flights and stuff like that, but a very short period in which you have the opportunity to do something. Okay, this is what the historical cases teaches us. I hope we won't waste it because at the moment you see that you have countries that are willing to take, to be involved. Of course, if Hamas will step down, but if Hamas will remain in power, and this is something that I'm not sure that the American understand, if Hamas will remain in power and everybody will lose their energy, and then eventually Israel will go in back, but everybody will be too wear out of even thinking about it and say, you know what, do whatever you want. We are not involved in it. That would be bad. And then in such a case, Israel will indeed need to, to exercise its own military government as the one that you mentioned. By the way, there are many military government models, and I'm saying it as an ex-military government officer. There are many models that can be implemented, but this is not the desirable thing. We don't want Israel to take control of the Gaza Strip. The army don't want it. The army openly reject such a possibility because it will require a lot of money and a lot of manpower, and they don't want to do it, basically. So we need to keep in mind that we have a very short slot of when we can do things with the international community and do it as soon as possible. Otherwise, it messes up the situation.
Great. Let me go to the audience here. Let me try to take some questions here. So, Robert Lerman is asking a question. I mean, is it feasible as far as this going back to, a segue to your last point, as far as economic development, is it possible to your mind, or his question, to take on economic development in the areas that Israel is controlling as far as the yellow line versus, and trying to kind of create, in this segregation, what I'm interpreting here as far as, partial economic development in parts that Israel can control versus the other parts that it can't control and then migrate. Is that an option, or is that not feasible, as far as the way the situation is laid out at this point?
I do think it's an option. I do think it's an option because it's a considerable part of the Gaza Strip. You have enough territory to start something there. For the record, I need to say that there are something like 50,000 Palestinians living there, mainly from the clans that are working with Israel. And there are many others that I'm pretty sure would like to go back to these areas simply because they were rooted out from this area. So they would like to go back, especially if the situation there will be better than what they have at the moment in the central camps, the Muasi area, and Gaza City, which are basically the areas that compose the black area, so called. It is an option, but somebody needs to fund it. Somebody needs to send, for example, caravans and not tents necessarily, and to start to develop it. It will take a long time, Asaf, as an option, but maybe because that everybody understands that the situation at the moment is somehow or probably temporary, they will maybe they are waiting with implementing such a plan until it would be clearer what is Israel going to do in the Gaza Strip. Because if it's going to hit Hamas and to change the whole situation, it will create different conditions for implementing such a day after plans. You've mentioned immigration. I think in terms of immigration, it is important to say that probably if you would open the Rafah crossing at the moment and allow the Palestinians to go out, you would have a massive immigration out of Gaza Strip. We see it in every survey for a very long time. And it's not something even unique for the Gaza Strip. I mean, we can all look at the war zones like the Ukraine, like Syria, like so many others, and there's always mass immigration. It's actually a power of nature more than anything else. But at the moment, they are not able to do that simply because the Rafah crossing is closed. So at one point, I think Israel will allow it, depending on other arrangements, and then we will see immigration as part of the so-called day after situation, and it's an element, a factor that we need to take into account as well.
Great. Let me jump to another question here by Mark Aronson. I mean, so just jumping again to the area of Judea and Samaria, as far as those areas. So he's asking about, and again, who's selling arms in those areas? And I'm adding to that question. So talk about, I mean, I know you've done work on this. Talk about the connectivity between, Gaza and Judea and Samaria as far as the Palestinian populations and as far as how the current situation is impacting, as far as creating hot zones, domino effects, as far as how that all plays out, as far as what we're seeing, again, all part of this day after tomorrow scenario, given the fact that while it's nice to compartmentalize, Gaza on its own, we know it doesn't work in a vacuum. So, talk about that as well within the internal dynamics of Palestinian society.
Well, for us as Westerners, I think it's very hard to understand the notion of a regional identity. Namely, if I'm from the West Bank, how do I see myself? How do I see, even from my own territory of the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, how do I see, if I'm from Hebron, how do I see people from Nablus, for example? And as someone who a major part of his research is about such an identity of clan identity and regional identity, I can tell you it's a huge element that affects any dimension of the Palestinian in his everyday life. West bankers don't see Palestinians from the Gaza Strip as, I would say, full brothers. They are, and I can give hundreds of examples, they see them as people who shares a certain common denominator of faith, the same enemy, the same, several things, but some of them don't even see them as Palestinians, as I was surprised to see, to discover. But regardless of the real answer, which is yes, of course they are Palestinians, because 80% of them were displaced from the Jaffa line all the way to the Gaza Strip. So obviously they are Palestinians, but it doesn't matter. In terms of identity, they are not connected. And therefore, it was always an issue between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, even in operational dimensions, such as of Hamas. Hamas needed contact people from the West Bank to sit in its own, places in the Gaza Strip in order to maintain this connection. Otherwise, something really vital will miss, and that's trust. Trust between the Hamas in the Gaza Strip and Hamas in the West Bank. And we see it in so many events and cases in which this bridge was a very vital one. Israel, at one point, eventually understood that indeed, if Israel wants to preempt those attempts to create something in between the two areas, it needs to target those bridges, those weak ties, as we call it, weak ties between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So this is regarding the networking and the identity between those two areas. It's a fascinating thing, I must say, and extremely important in a way that most of us don't realize. Regarding weapons, yes, unfortunately, Iran for a very long time managed to push a lot of weapons into the West Bank. I think Israel got better with that lately, although new challenges appears on a daily basis. The new ones are huge drones that are being used for spraying fields, with the not repellents, materials against.
Pesticides.
Pesticides.
Yes, exactly. But they are being converted to vehicles that takes weapons, machine guns, and so on and so forth. And it's a major challenge for the IDF and a constant battle in that sense. I think the problem is still there. And unfortunately, I think we will, at one point or another, we will need to deal with those weapons on a more systematic basis. By the way, including by Israeli Arabs, that according to many assessment, mainly not necessarily on a national basis, by the way, but rather a criminal one between their crime organization that are accumulating stashes of weapons. This is a major threat because at one point it can be turned against us. Not to mention the fact that you see an annual increase in the amount of Arab civilians that die because of this weapon from other Arabs. And it goes like this, and it's a major threat and something that Israel needs to deal more aggressively.
And to your point before, Harel, which is a critical point. I mean, really, as part of the demystifying the totality or the fact that Palestinian society is one society, but it's even, it's more fragmented and and it goes, and this is something obviously you've done a great deal of research and work on as far as the locale, the phrase, the actual language that is used as far as the kind of Arabic. I mean, the whole cultural dynamic as far as Palestinian fragmentation versus the perceived kind of totality, and messaging as far as one society, which again speaks a larger to Palestinian leadership, which I'm sure is a whole other lecture to get into. But it is critical to understand how fragmented Palestinian society is, while at the same time, obviously, the glue that keeps it all together has to do with the animosity towards, anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism. But as far as a monolithic society, it's far from it, which is obviously critical to understand.
Sure.
Alex, taking it back to you.
Sure. Let's talk very quickly about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that's Qatar, um, which has played all sides off against each other brilliantly, funds Hamas and lots of other folks, and has advised Hamas and the Americans, and has posed as negotiators and so on and so on. There was just a report this morning by Ron Ben Yishai about Qatari conditions that they've forced on the Americans with respect to that claims that there's limits on Hamas disarmament, basically to play out the clock. What's the role going forward?
Well, I must say it's very worrying because it seems that this administration, like the ones before, but maybe this one even more, think of Qatar as an ally, as a precious ally, and I know it really from a first hand, and of people that I know from the administration and people from the UN, including Israelis, that still don't understand the roles that Qatar is playing, how crucial and devastating it is, not only to Israeli interest but to American interest. They are undermining the very foundations of Western society, in which America is a major beacon. So I'm pretty worried by it. Although every now and then, a ray of light is shining our world around. And something like that happened just yesterday when President Trump said that he's going to declare on the Muslim Brotherhood as a terror organization. Now, I don't know how Qatar will react to this because Qatar is Muslim Brotherhood. They are funding Muslim Brotherhood. They are supporting Muslim Brotherhood. Everybody know it. Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates are threatening against the Muslim Brotherhood, and they de-radicalized themselves from Muslim Brotherhood. Qatar, in United Arab Emirates, there are research centers that wrote so many books about the danger of Muslim Brotherhood. So maybe some of it penetrated this administration. Obviously, what Israel is doing and others are doing as well, including some in this room, but it is a major development because the Muslim Brotherhood are running all the show in America, running from BDS, SJP, Student for Justice in Palestine, the Jewish organization, duped Jewish organization of Jewish Voices for Peace, that are duped by Muslim Brotherhood, to serve their cause in America. We need to emphasize Muslim Brotherhood in the United States are Hamas, period. Controlled by Hamas, led by Hamas, main personalities, Hamas, okay? Ranging from Niad Awad, the head of CARE, that was designated as a suspicious in terror ties, I think, during Biden administration, Asaf?
Yeah,
Earlier.
earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all the way to, of course, American Muslims for Palestine, of Khatem Bazian and others. They are a major threat for this country, for its Jews, and for any American who loves his country. So in that sense, this administration is doing the right thing. We need to see how Qatar will react to this, as well as Turkey. But Turkey is has less impact on the United States. But Qatar is obviously much more instrumental in that sense.
Great. Alex, your follow-up there?
No, please go back to the audience, please.
All right. Well, I mean, I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here and Harel's time as far as his class and his next meeting. So I think that what we're going to do is, wrap it up for today. And I want to thank Harel for taking the time to join us this afternoon and squeezing into his busy teaching schedule. I want to thank Alex, as always, for joining me. And above all, I want to thank the audience for joining us this afternoon. There's obviously much to unpack. There's a lot of fluidity into all of this, and there's a lot to tackle. And hopefully, we know we can tap on Harel's shoulder to come back and talk to us again. I'll also take the opportunity to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. We will resume our webinars after the holiday, and wish everybody a good day and stay safe out there. Take care.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much, Harel.
Thank you very much.